All right, good morning, afternoon. Welcome back to Ancient Greece Part 2, where we did Ancient Greece Part 1 yesterday. All right, getting into our objectives, very similar to the ones from yesterday, except for the I know I haven't one is a little bit different. Today, I will learn about ancient Greek civilization so I can understand the influence ancient Greece has on our world today. I know I haven't when I am able to tell friends and family about the influence ancient Greeks had on math, science, architecture, literature, and democracy. So for today's lesson, part 2, we are going to get more so into the influence that the ancient Greeks had in those 5 categories. Now, the vocab words, we have 5. Those are going to be empirical, architecture, motif, direct democracy, and representative democracy. So please make sure that you are keeping an eye out for those in today's lesson, along with their definitions. And the 4 topics for today, basically just the I know I haven't when topics there: math, science, architecture, literature, and democracy in terms of how the ancient Greeks influenced those particular branches.
The ancient Greeks were seekers of truth and beauty, and mathematics fit neatly into their worldview. A love of geometry is evident in their architecture. Greek structures based on geometric concepts are great monuments that have withstood throughout the centuries.
How has ancient Greece influenced how we live today?
I think that ancient Greece has influenced our society in a major way in building and architecture.
Well, a lot of things from ancient Greece are still around today, like their Greek gods.
Just the entire style is prominent in, like, for instance, the White House and a lot of court buildings.
A lot of types of politics started back in ancient Greece.
Well, the Olympics is one big thing.
They're really good at mathematics, and they're like solutions to different problems and methods for solving different problems we still use today.
Few civilizations have affected the modern world as much as ancient Greece. The awareness the Greeks had of the potential of the human race led to the formation of a new way of thinking and living. Many of the ideas that developed in this civilization have lasted for thousands of years and remain deeply rooted in our own society. The Greeks' ideas about government, philosophy, art, science, and mathematics continue to shape our daily lives. Over the course of the first millennium BC, the Greeks produced many of history's greatest thinkers. Socrates, Aristotle, and Plato introduced a concept that had not been seen in the ancient world: the pursuit of knowledge for the sake of knowledge. No ancient civilization defined their purpose as thoroughly as the Greeks. They were the first society ever to think about thinking, which gave rise to the study of philosophy. As philosophers in ancient Greece examined the world through a more discerning eye, they began to uncover relationships between the natural world and mathematics. As these relationships became more clearly defined, the foundations for the study of geometry would be laid for all future generations. Much of ancient Greece's scientific development can be attributed to its physical geography. Nestled between Africa and Asia Minor, Greece came in contact with 2 other major civilizations of the time, Egypt and Babylonia. Both clearly had great influence on the Greeks. The Egyptians formed one of the most complex ancient civilizations. Excelling in architecture, they utilized their keen understanding of math and science to build elaborate cities and massive structures that no civilization has ever attempted to repeat. From the Egyptians, the Greeks learned their scientific and mathematical principles. They further defined them and expanded them to fit into their modern philosophical context. There is a great deal of evidence proving that both the Egyptians and Babylonians understood and used geometry. When we examine the surviving mathematical texts of the Egyptians, we find that the scribes solved many problems involving geometric constructions such as circles, squares, and pyramids. The Babylonians also performed many operations in geometry, most notably using the Pythagorean Theorem to determine the lengths of objects. The Babylonians and the Egyptians mainly used geometry to find numerical approximations in measuring objects and distances. Their geometry was rooted entirely in practicality. Both cultures built large structures and temples, which would require calculating the size and volumes of bricks and stones used in building. However, neither culture was overly concerned with using geometry formulas to find exact values, as their approximate results were often accurate enough for practical use. In contrast, the Greeks took a very different approach to mathematics and geometry. Building upon what they had learned from the Egyptians and Babylonians, they found fundamental truths in geometry, and from these truths made propositions called axioms. Through deductive reasoning, the Greeks would use these axioms to find new truths, or theorems that could always be proven. These theorems would be used to find exact solutions to problems of both a practical and abstract nature.
Now, when it came to math, the Greeks had a particular love for it, especially in the field of geometry, which is just the mathematical study of shapes. So the ancient Greek known as Pythagoras actually came up with a theorem, which was eventually named after him, the Pythagorean Theorem, which essentially can be boiled down to a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Or if you have a right triangle here, a triangle with a 90-degree angle, and you know the lengths of these sides here, and you create a square from these sides, so A and then B, and you add up these areas, you will know that this adding up of the areas of A and B for these squares here is going to equal the area of this square over here for C. All right, and that is the Pythagorean theorem named after Pythagoras. Now, in terms of the science side, the Greeks also had a lot of advancements in science, especially in the areas of biology and medicine. So Aristotle, we talked about him a little bit yesterday, a philosopher, but also considered to be one of the very first Western scientists, is also credited with being the father of biology because of his findings in the field of like wildlife, so animals and plants, and his observations there. One of the first Greeks to actually use empirical or evidence for his findings. Okay, and that actually is getting into our next bullet point here, along with the actual vocab word empirical. Okay, empirical just means something that is based on observation. Pretty much what the whole field of science is based on is empirical or observation-based evidence. Okay, so the Greeks were actually one of the first Western civilizations to actually use empirical or evidence-based medicine because at the time, doctors, people that basically have their profession in medicine, mostly based a lot of their findings, a lot of their teachings on sort of like spiritual, religious aspects. So the Greeks did that as well, but they actually also mixed in a little bit more actual like scientific or observation-based medicine, especially Hippocrates. So Hippocrates is actually considered to be one of the forefathers of medicine. Okay, in fact, a lot of people dub him the father of medicine. And even today, doctors still use, or pretty much any medical field still goes underneath an oath called the Hippocratic Oath, or you might have heard it as HIPAA. So that's essentially a patient or a doctor cannot divulge information, cannot give out information about who they're seeing in terms of their patient, because that is sensitive personal medical information. So next, we're going to go ahead and get into Greek influence on architecture. So pretty much like the most important ancient Greek structure is going to be the Parthenon in Athens. Okay, it's actually part of the Athenian Acropolis, and I mentioned an Acropolis yesterday. Remember, it's just like the hilltop, especially like in Athens, it's like the hilltop that is fortified for military strategy. Now, the Parthenon here, as you can see in the picture, is actually well known for its distinct pillar architecture. Okay, architecture just means the structure or the style of a building. So these pillars here, you might actually, you see them here now on the Parthenon, and you might be thinking to yourself, well, hey, wait a minute, especially if you're like driven like downtown in Texas or any other state, and you've seen the government buildings, a lot of the bigger government buildings actually are based on this style here. This, I believe it's called the Dork style of ancient Greek architecture, where you see these pillars here with little like ridges on the sides. I also believe that the White House does have these pillars as part of its building style or structure. And So Western style buildings have been influenced. So thousands of years after the ancient Greeks actually started pioneering the style or started the style, thousands of years later, even today, a lot of the buildings we see here in the West, in the Americas, also in Europe, are influenced by this architecture style here.
In this program, we're going to learn about the word Acropolis. What is an Acropolis? An Acropolis is a fortified hilltop in an ancient Greek city. The word comes from the Greek words akro, which means high, and polis, which means city. In ancient Greece, oftentimes cities were built around a fortress on top of a hill. Most Greek cities had their Acropolis, where people found shelter during war times. The best known Acropolis is located in Athens, Greece. On this flat-topped hill overlooking the city of Athens are several important Greek temples. The most important temple built on the Acropolis is the Parthenon. It was devoted to the worship of the goddess Athena, who was the protector of the city-state of Athens. There are other temples located on the Acropolis too. They are the Erechtheion, named for a mythical king of Athens, as well as the Temple of Athena Nike, dedicated to the goddess of victory. The Acropolis of Athens is a good example of the ancient Greek culture that existed in the 5th century BC. The temples on the Acropolis are some of the world's most important buildings. They would influence the architecture of the Western world for over 2,000 years. Now that you know more about an Acropolis, think about this. Why was it important to the Greeks to have a location high above the city?
Okay, next we have ancient Greek literature. Now, the Greeks had a whole lot of authors and poets, very famous ones, but now none of them were probably as influential, as important as Homer, the great Greek or ancient Greek poet. Homer's two famous works were going to be the Iliad, which just talks about the Trojan War, basically in a nutshell. A Trojan prince kidnaps a Greek princess, and then the Greek king, I believe it was King of Sparta at the time, sends Greek troops over, and they basically wage a war with the city of Troy. And then the Greeks ended up tricking the Trojans into accepting a wooden horse, which actually has Greek soldiers in it. So whenever the Trojans, have a horse inside their stronghold in their city, and they're all fast asleep, the Greeks go ahead, sneak out of the horse, and then basically slaughter and win over Troy. Then his second work is actually considered to be a sequel, or the second part to the Iliad is going to be the Odyssey, which stars Odysseus and his return from Troy. Odysseus was actually one of the Greek heroes in the Trojan horse during the Trojan War in Homer's Iliad. So those two are going to be his great epic poems. Now, heroism was actually a very important motif or central idea in Homer's epic poems. Okay, so poems here, they're not like the poems that you're probably used to where they're, quite short, maybe like a page long. No, Homer's epic poems were epic. They had like really long drawn out storylines. They were essentially like novels written out in a poetic fashion.
But it turns out that Greece isn't the only place where travelers can experience Greek myths. The Greeks had been telling stories about the gods of Mount Olympus for millennia. But it wasn't until Homer wrote the Iliad in the 8th century BC that they were immortalized with the written word. This epic poem is filled with legendary locations, including the site of the most fabled military smackdown of the ancient world. Turkey. A nation straddling continents, part European, part Asian, and something else entirely. And in the far western edge of the country, near the Aegean Sea, is a ruined stronghold. Today, a place of half-buried stone walls, broken columns, and an empty amphitheater. But its name still rings eternal: Troy. It was the battlefield of the Trojan War. But is the war all legend, or was this place the site of something truly historic? According to the Iliad, the war was sparked when a Trojan prince named Paris abducted the beautiful Helen from her husband, Sparta's King Menelaus. The king dispatched a Greek army across the sea to find them and lay waste to the opulent city of Troy. What ensues is a battle for the ages, a 10-year war of attrition that culminates in a military maneuver so brilliant, so daring, that it's become the stuff of legend. After 10 long years of fighting at the Trojan enemy gates, the battle-weary Greek army crafts a cunning plan of attack. The troops pretend to retreat, leaving behind a giant wooden horse. Without looking the gift horse in the mouth, the Trojans wheel it past the gates and celebrate their victory. That night, as the citizens sleep it off, Greek soldiers hiding inside the horse bust out and take down the city. There's still debate about whether the Trojan War really happened, but if it did, there's little debate about where. 150 miles southwest of Turkey's most famous city, the vibrant seaport of Çanakkale is a little gem that cashes in on its proximity to a big horse. Just a short drive from town, this towering symbol of the Trojan War stands proudly, waiting for visitors to climb in and channel their favorite Greek warrior.
I'm Turkish, but I have never been here, so I just heard about the Troy legend. I have watched the film for 3 times, 4 times, because I love Brad Pitt so much. It's just gorgeous. I have seen the one in the film, but when I see this one, it's wonderful.
The giant horse sits outside a field of stone rubble that may hold the answer to the million-dollar question: could the Trojan War be based on truth?
And then finally, we have arguably the most important thing that the Greeks invented, basically, and that is going to be democracy. All right, so we actually did review this in a previous lesson video way back whenever we're reviewing for one of our CUAs. But we're going to go ahead and go over it again right here. So again, democracy was created in Athens, Greece. That is considered to be the birthplace of democracy by a figure known as Solon. Solon was he basically saw that the structure of the government at the time in Greece was not really working out. The kings were just, just a whole lot of corruption going around. So he thought, hey, you know what? Whenever I become king, whenever I become the archon, why don't I see if I can basically give away some of my power to the people? And turns out it actually wasn't a bad idea. It actually helped alleviate a lot of the corruption from the Greek government at the time. Now, a democracy is actually a combination of 2 Greek root words here. So kratos, which means rule, and then demos, by the people, which combines into demokratia, which is where we get the word democracy from. Now, in ancient Greece, the assembly of people to actually go and vote was going to be known as the ecclesia. So in Athens, they actually assembled. So the ecclesia actually assembled near a hill, I believe it was called the Panaikes. Starts with a P, 4 letters. It's evading my memory right now, but in Athens, the ecclesia did gather up on the hill to make those voting on policies. And then the ancient Greeks actually had a form of democracy known as direct democracy, which basically just means that people directly vote on policies and issues, okay? But we don't really see that a whole lot nowadays. I think the only place that actually has a direct democracy in modern times is going to be the country of Switzerland, because most democracies today, like the United States, are going to be a form of representative democracy, which means that the people elect officials, and then those elected officials then vote on policies and issues, all right? And then here you can see a figure here of Solon at the bottom, and then this is actually going to be a picture of the ecclesia, or the assembly, gathered here. I think specifically they're not actually voting in this particular photo. This is actually going to be like a funeral oration, or like a little funeral speech given by a figure known as Pericles here. but that is going to be a democratic assembly in ancient Greece.
What is a democracy and how does it work? We've already learned about two forms of government from around the globe. Now let's take a look at one that's a little closer to home. Let's look at democracy. A democratic government is one in which the people of the country, rather than a king, queen, emperor, or empress, make the necessary decisions on how that country will conduct itself. The word democracy comes from two Greek words, demos, which means the people, and kratia, which means power or authority. So, in a democracy, all the power goes to the people. Simply put, a democracy is a form of government that functions on self-rule, as the citizens are the ultimate authority and create for themselves both the rules of the local and national government and the means to enforce them. Democracy dates at least to ancient Greece, often called the Cradle of Democracy, around 430 BCE. In a pure or direct democracy, every person gets an equal say as to the rules and regulations of a country. However, the only country today that is currently considered a direct democracy is Switzerland. Most democratic countries have representative forms of government. For example, in the United States, which has a republic democracy, individuals are elected to positions of authority by the citizens to represent their best interests on the national and local level, which the elected officials do by voting, because in a republic, the ultimate authority comes from the citizens and their vote.
And that brings us for our objectives that we completed today, which is going to be that we learn about ancient Greek civilization. Why? So we could understand the influence ancient Greece has on our world today. And then finally, you have it when, if you can tell your friends and family when you go home today about the influence ancient Greeks had on math, science, architecture, literature, and democracy. Boom. Okay. Now there is going to be an activity in today's folder. It is going to be sort of like a little direct democracy activity. It's going to be a little bit different for the virtual learners as opposed to the face-to-face learners. So face-to-face learners, y'all are going to go ahead and the instructions are going to be in the folder. You're going to be opening up like a separate little PowerPoint with these instructions there. And we're basically going to be having like a little like mini sort of debate and then directly voting on certain little policies there. And I'm sure y'all going to enjoy that. Virtual learners, y'all are going to go ahead and pretty much do the exact same thing, except it's going to be a little bit like a smaller, more contained version on the online discussion board in today's folder. So please make sure y'all check that out. All right, that being said, y'all take care, have a good and safe rest of your Friday, and have a great weekend. Bye-bye.